What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. It's the Doodads Podcast. We are here tonight, episode 6. If you haven't yet, episode 5 is out. It was a good one. You should check it out. You should also like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can check us out on Spotify. We're there too. Find our page on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. Tiki-Taki. We're up there too. But yeah, do us a favor, man. If you like what you hear, click the button, like, subscribe. That shows us that you care and shows us that what we're doing is not a complete waste of everybody's time.
Or leave a mean comment.
Leave a mean comment.
Because then we at least know.
We at least know we're ruffling some feathers. Or leave a nice comment, because sometimes I can be sensitive depending on what day of the week it is and what color my underwear are. But at this point, as you can see, it's a little bit prettier at the table tonight than just these two bearded gentlemen.
Scooch.
I'm going to hand it off to Carl, who's going to introduce our guest tonight.
Well, all right. Yeah, I mean, first, how was your weekend?
I don't really remember. It was decent. We didn't do a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of activity to really catch up on. It's been a busy week, and I know it's only Tuesday, but 2 days can feel like 7 sometimes.
Same.
How was y'all's weekend? Y'all's was good?
Yeah. I mean, it was good. Did a little stuff around the house, you know.
That's good. Did you wear an apron?
No, but
Our viewers would like to know.
Well, but so, like, here's the deal. I actually have, like, a little apron that I got for Christmas, and it's a little Star Wars apron, and I so want to wear it with Ben because he's got the whole... Well, yeah.
If Carl didn't strike you as an apron guy, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. He is an apron guy.
I'm a savage in the kitchen.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, so seriously, I am extremely grateful to have my friend Robin here. I've known Robin for, I know well over a decade.
I lived here 10 and a half years, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Right on the nose, buddy.
It's good math.
Yeah. I don't know, man, like, when we were sitting down doing this and I was talking with Brandon, you know, the whole idea was, how do we get to an audience and get to a group of people, and not just men, but you know, just an audience that wants to hear about dads, wants to hear about men trying to circumnavigate this this ideology that I think most of us are brought up with and emotionally attached to, and you spend a majority of your life trying to shed. And we were talking, I was like, yeah, man, and look, my friend Robin, and you were one of the first names that came out. And look, small hit list, okay? Small hit list. Originally from New York, went to Boston University, published 12 best-selling young adult novels, including one that was made into a highly rated Disney Channel original movie. She's also written movies for Hallmark, Freeform, and Nickelodeon. We're talking a SAG life, man. We're talking production, writing, just truly, I don't know. It's always for me to be around somebody that has that kind of, that kind of background that just, I always think of this story. I got a friend of mine who wanted to go be a model, and everybody kind of made fun of him. And it's like, you know, he ended up in like one commercial, and everybody made fun of his little headshots and him on the beach, you know, no shirt. But I was like, what have you done?
Right.
You know, and I just think it's so rad that you've done all that. And what's crazy is that then, you know, now a death doula and talking about end of life care and consideration and conversation about that. And you can find her on a TED Talk. Solid. So,
It's good. It's a good TED Talk.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love that you guys are doing this. I think it's really important. And I think that, you know, you modeling this for not just other dads, but just other guys. And it takes, I always say that, you know, you change something just a little bit, and soon you end up changing the trajectory of your life without even knowing it, you know? And a little goes a long way. So,
for sure.
Bravo.
Yeah. And it's cool because I think, just in the last couple of weeks of doing this, and when he and I first kind of talked, this topic, this subject matter, this, and I'm a fairly new dad and hope to have more children, but it's almost like being a dad and what that means to be a dad, or even a man, as we've kind of explored that too, is law and set in stone. And I think some of it works and some of it may not. And for us, this was just an attempt to be a representation of what that change and growth looks like for us personally, and hope that it maybe strikes a chord and rings a bell with 154 other people
Hey,
so far.
and growing.
But it is. I mean, I don't know. I'm a 90s kid. Nickelodeon and Disney Channel were my jam. And, I think I did listen to your TED Talk last night. I tried to do a little bit of preparation and homework on that. And there were some very interesting points, but I don't want to spoil anything, 7 minutes into this deal. But yeah.
I also want to say, and on that note, like, you're married to an okay guy.
Yeah.
But also, and as I always refer to Courtney, my superhero Wonder Woman. I always say that, like, and you are also, as a guy who predominantly his older sister, and that's, I think, one of the other things is, like, you and my sister were born within years of each other. So there's this kind of, like, I look at you and I go, I recognize it.
Right.
It's almost like this surrogate maternal kind of relationship, but you're also a mom to two beautiful kids.
Yeah, they are. They are. And I didn't want to be a mom. I had no interest in having children. Didn't want to get married. I lived in a converted barn in the Hudson Valley in New York, this stunning place. And I came to New Orleans to produce a movie, and I met Louis, my husband, in a coffee shop. And
Tell us that story.
Yeah, I'm interested.
okay. So I it was October of 2012, and I was working at MTV, and we had a movie. I was overseeing the original movies, and we had a movie that was going to shoot in New Orleans, and this one didn't have a producer. All the other ones did. And I remember sitting in my office and almost like I was in a trance. I got out of my chair and I went into my boss's office and I said, I'll go to New Orleans and shoot that movie. And he said, well, you'd be gone for months. And I was like, that's okay. And I called up my friend Nicole as soon as I got back to my office and I said, I don't know what I just signed up for. And she said, well, it's cold. It's getting cold in New York. Like, you'll get out of the cold. And I'm like, yeah. And she said, and you love New Orleans. And which was true. I did. And then she said, I feel like you're going to meet someone. And I said, I'm not going to meet someone. I'm going to be working so hard, the hours, blah, blah, blah. And so I really showed, and for some reason, all my girlfriends were like, I feel like you're going to meet someone. I was like, I'm not going to meet someone.
It's undefeated.
And I go, and everyone involved with this movie was just nuts. And I was like, oh my God, I'm by that time I was 44. I was like, I'm too old for this. Like, I don't want to do this. And I'm talking to Nicole, and she's like, well, you better do what you need to do to make sure that, you can get through this. And I was like, okay. And I went, and I went to this coffee shop, and Louis was there, and he had just come back to New Orleans from Maryland, and it was actually supposed to be back in Maryland and didn't go. And had he gone, I never would have met him. Huh. And so I met him, and then he kept asking me to breakfast, and I always had plans. I was always had work to do. And then he actually even asked me for Thanksgiving if I wanted to come for Thanksgiving. And I said, oh, I'm actually going home for New York.
Move, Cotton.
Yeah. And so we went out for breakfast on a Friday, and then we got together on Saturday night, and that was it. And we were together every night and day until I went home to New York. And 6 months later, I had rented out my house and moved here. and started trying to get pregnant. And I was like, oh my God.
Fellas, look, if you see her, go talk to her. Don't let it pass you by.
It was weird because
don't go back to Maryland.
Right. We were at a coffee shop and we were having breakfast, and there was this little girl, and I heard this voice in my head and was like, you're going to have children with this guy. And I was like, wait, what? And so I was 46 when my daughter was born, and then 47 when my son was born. And I always say, like, I'm the poster child for, you have no idea. I have a minivan. My minivan. I got a minivan. Like the thing that I used to just like make so much fun of. Like, right. I love my van.
From producing MTV original movies to minivans and soccer practice.
I'm in check out the
unpaid Uber driver. That's what I do.
The safety features on this thing is just.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah, it's great. It's really, and you know what? I couldn't have become a mother any earlier. Like it took all the growth and change to get me to be,
I tell people that's what we said last week, and I've told people that all the time. It's insane. There got to be a point where I was like, am I sterile? Is it like maybe because like it's never even been it. And at 39, having my biological son, I had a stepdaughter, but like to really then this infant, and I was like, you know what? I couldn't have done this any earlier, because I look back at me and I go, oh no, you'd have been terrible. Right. Yep. These kids would have had so many problems. Right. So you went to Boston University, and was this just like your calling? You were going to be a writer? You're going to be in movie and film and literature?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a writer. I remember in second grade, I wrote a story, and the teacher read it to the class. I remember this so vividly. And they all clapped. And I was like, oh, my God. But I didn't think I could make a living as a writer. So it was like I always kept a journal, but, writing was just, it wasn't going to support me. And I loved Hollywood, and I loved movies and TV. So I studied mass communication and public relations in college, and then I moved out to LA right after graduation. And I got a job as an assistant at a talent agency, because that was always like a great entry job into the business. And I did that for a year and a half, and then I was promoted, and I was an agent, and I was representing television writers. And then I went and worked with a producer, and then I went to Lifetime Television for 5 years and worked on the movies there, which was great. And then one day I was driving to work. It was like a busy, Monday morning, and I pulled over on the side of the road, and I was like, I was going to be a writer. What happened? And, I wasn't ready to leave my job. And then I had this amazing thing happen where, but I was really unhappy in my job. And I got this new boss, and I kind of said to him, like, I'm here to support you. And, I didn't want his job. I was done. And one day we were in the elevator, and he said, how are you? And I said, I'm great. And he looked at me and he said, I don't think you are. And I was like, what? And he said, I don't think you're happy. And I stood there and I was like, okay, we stood at the turning point, and I was like, I'm either going to tell the truth and see what happens or not. And I was like, I'm not. And luckily, he had a career where he had been in a lot of different jobs, but like, and then his trajectory was, he'd get this great job and then the company would fold or something, but he had this contract, so he kept paying out. So like he was living in Hawaii before he came back here. And
is that no longer job still hiring?
Is what?
Is that no longer company still hiring?
Yes,
that
right, exactly. And so he said to me, and I wanted to write, and I hadn't told anyone I wanted to write. And a few days later, he said, okay, well, we'll figure something out. And so he said, I was thinking, what if you find a project that you want to write, And then that way you can get into the Writers Guild. And, it's like a nice sort of exit package. And I was like, oh my God, he didn't know I wanted to write, but I did. So I was having a meeting with a producer, and she was pitching me this book. And I'm listening to the story, and I'm like, I could write that. And at the end of the pitch, she said, I wish you could write this. And I was like, well, actually.
Funny
and
you say that.
exactly.
I'm thinking the same thing.
So I went to my boss and I said, this was just pitched to me. What do you think? And he said, great. And so I ended up, so I was going to leave, and it was an adaptation of a book. And when I started working on the outline, the producer kept trying to say, we need to go in this direction. And having worked at the network, I knew kind of what they were looking for and what was going to work. And I was like, I don't think that's going to work. And she was like, well, I'm the producer. You're no longer the executive. You have to do it the way that I want. And I was like, all right. And so I write this outline, and we go pitch it to the network. And they're like, yeah, that's not going to work. We want you to go this way. And I was like, you know what? I could spend the whole next year writing this, but it's going to be an uphill battle, and it's going to be a clash of egos. And at that time I had started writing a novel. And again, like, stood at the turning point, and I was like, I could forfeit this money, which it was like $35,000, which a lot of money, or I could forfeit that and work on the book, or I could just keep going or whatever. And I had a manager at the time, and I called him up and I said, you know what? I don't want to do this project anymore. I just want to cut my losses and go. And he was like, you're giving up a lot of money, and they're never going to hire you again if you do this. And I was like, I know, it doesn't feel like the right thing to do. So my mother, who died when I was 6, was German, and she still had a lot of family in Germany. And I had recently gotten back in touch with my family over there because the internet was had finally become a thing where I could track them down. And it turned out my grandfather had died. And my cousin had said, and my mother had 3 sisters. And my cousin said, you should get what would have been your mother's part of the inheritance. And I was like, that's okay. I'm just happy to be back in touch. And he said, no, my mom she's going to hire a lawyer, because the other sisters were like, no, where's she been? They didn't want to give up the money. And 2 days after I walked away from the $35,000, I got an email saying, we were able to get you your inheritance for $35,000.
No.
Of course.
And I was like, okay, so my mother was my first patron, and paid for me. But so, that's always been kind of, when I've taken that risk to listen to my gut, it's always paid off. Sometimes, literally, but sometimes just I just get these crumbs that let me know that I'm on the right way. So I continued. I was writing screenplays still, and which was great. But so in 2019, August 2019, my dad, who lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I was kind of like his person, and I was going back and forth. And 5 months later, he died. And this was really amazing. So, I'll get to that part. So anyways, my dad and I, we were really lucky. We had 5 great months together, amazing conversations. But, so that was all wonderful. And my stepsister and I, who we had been estranged for 20 years, reunited over this, which was amazing. And we were holding his hands when he died. And it's funny because my dad... And by this time, we had both been away from our kids a lot. And my dad didn't, my stepmom was in Michigan, and we didn't know what to do in terms of a memorial service or whatever. But the next morning was a Saturday, And he had a morning Al-Anon meeting that he went to every Saturday for 20 years. And we went to the meeting that morning, and they had a chair open for him. And everyone just talked about my dad and how great he was. And that was our memorial. You know, it was all he needed. And it was really, really beautiful. And it was just because my dad's recovery was really important to him. And, but anyways, so that was great. The emotional part was great. But he was not prepared. Like, he didn't have his stuff in order. Like, I remember sitting in his hospital room. He had these 2 elderly dogs, and I'm calling rescues, and I'm like, can you take these dogs? And they're like, no, you should take them. And I was like, I live in Louisiana. I have 2 dogs and 2 children. Like, I can't. And being like, shit, she's like, you can't just throw them away. And I'm like, I'm not. I'm calling you for help here. And then we found a place in Tucson, and my sister drove all the way to Tucson only to find out it wasn't like a good fit and had to drive back. And all of this was like hours that could have been spent with my dad. And instead, running around like a chicken without a head and trying to track everything down. And so it was a lot, And so I became really fascinated with the whole end of life process. And also fascinated with like, okay, gosh, this is what it looks like when you're not prepared. And this is the burden it puts on, I would do it a million times over, but it was a lot. And so 2 years later, I found a lump near my groin, and I was waiting for the biopsy results. And I was like, what am I going to do? Like, if this is something, and my daughter was 6, which was the age I was when I lost my mom. And, I was like, what am I going to do? How could I leave these children behind? And like, what would I do if I had to do that? And so it was kind of this perfect storm. And by that time, doulas, both birth doulas and end-of-life doulas, like, they're kind of a big thing on the East and West Coast, but not so much in the middle of the country. But Zoom was a thing because of the pandemic. And so I was able to start taking different trainings, which I did, and it was great. And it was, it's and because of my background as a writer, I love doing legacy projects with people, and so that's a big part of my process. But I think, my mom died by suicide when I was 6, and that was my first introduction to death, and I never got that goodbye, and then I never got to grieve because I was 6 and it was the mid-70s and you just don't talk about this stuff. And so I think intuitively, like I kept saying, oh, it was because of my dad's death and, my own brush with mortality. But really it's because I don't think I want anyone to go through what I went through. I want people to be able to have closure, and I want people to be prepared. And so I love it. I love everyone has a story and everyone has a situation. Every family's different. And I have seen, I've seen so much healing come along with the loss, and it's such a privilege, like, and it really keeps me honest in that I want to get up in my head and get all riled up about something. And then I'm like, I come from a client who, has stage 4 cancer. I'm like, you know what, Robin, you don't have any problems.
I think about that whole thing where like Gary Vee, his big thing is like, if you wake up today and the 5 most important, like whatever, your wife or your husband, your mom, dad, the people you love, like your family, like if you wake up and they're all healthy,
yeah,
life is good.
Yeah.
And I haven't lost my mom. Like that was, yeah.
I would imagine that there's, and I don't mean for this to sound morbid at all, but I would imagine that there's something significant for or toward the gratitude for your own life and your situation, your circumstances, no matter what they are, spending days close to somebody who's on their way out that I can't imagine being able to find that type of gratitude in anything else.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, but I still, my mom's remarried. Her and my stepdad are both still living and kicking, and my dad's still alive. And I've suffered loss of grandparents and friends and stuff, but never a parent. And I remember recently, just about 5 or 6 months ago, through a discussion with a person, brought up one of my fears being that, because I just had a moment at some point last year, just kind of sitting there, and it kind of hit me, and I was like, man, like, I'm not getting any younger, and my parents aren't getting any younger, and like, that is a realistic thing that is just part of the circle of life that, for me, I get so caught up in what my brain does about it, especially now having a child of my own, and the fear that comes along with that I've never really learned to address, deal with, or like you had talked about, learning to live with, like in any healthy way or in any, I tend to just pretend like it's not going to happen, as opposed to really understanding and accepting that it's part of the life cycle as we know it. And, so, I mean, I don't know that, but I also think too, not to go too far back, but just Ken and I were kind of talking before we started. And I just think back to your story of kind of how you got to that point, and after X amount of years doing and having that moment and going, I was supposed to be a writer.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about, was just like how, in so many people, myself to a certain extent, plenty of people I know, and I'm sure there's a large percentage of men and dads around the world and the country that get sucked into, this is what I do to provide,
totally.
but this isn't what I love. This is, there's a line between getting to do what you're passionate about and doing what you have to do to provide.
Yep.
And, I rarely do I feel like those lines. So I just think it was cool to have that moment, and then, as you say, the universe being undefeated, have that work in so many cool ways to be able to live that out and carry that out. Because if I had my way, I told Ken, if I had my way tomorrow, I would wake up and I would pursue being a tattoo artist and doing this podcast.
Wow.
But, turns out you have to be really good at tattooing in order to make a lot of money doing it. And you have to have more than 154 subscribers to make money off of a podcast. So as it sits, I'm going to go do my home inspection in the morning.
See, I also think it's like I always say, you have to be willing to eat shit a little bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
How old were you when you published your first book?
It was 2008, I think. So I was 39.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but that's my point.
Right.
My mom passed away when I was 39 years old. You know what I'm saying? She was 39. Okay? My mom died, she was 30. I was 39 years old. And like, the sense of mortality that I got, this idea of, and it's so hard if you haven't lost a parent, right? Like because like I said, I would be sitting there in the recliner, and because it happened, the 15th will be the anniversary of Louisiana shutting down,
Right.
because we buried her the 5th, and then the 15th was the shutdown, and so I'd just be sitting at the house, and I'd be just crying, and it's not like a huge just wailing cry, but it was just grief.
Yep.
And Courtney would, because she was working, in a hospital and a treatment center, and she's essential, so she would come home and she'd be like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "My mom died," and it was so hard. I was like, I am a person who had a mom.
Yeah.
And on February 28th of 2020, I no longer had a mom. And everything I will ever say from this point forward will be in past tense.
You no longer have a mom that is alive on this earth.
Yes, right. But it's just like everything will be in past tense. And
Yes.
it's like it is such a hard thing to deal with sometimes to get across to people. And at that moment is when I realized, like, dude, if you and me have a problem, like I will do whatever I can to try to make it right. It may not be on your time and whatever, but I truly am sorry, because there's not enough time, and I want to do the most I can with that time. And so when, you say you published almost at 40 for the first time, it's like, but you put in work, and I got a friend, David Steed, who hopefully, David, you're listening and subscribed. You know what? He gave me my first tattoo. And you know where he was working? At Lucky 13 outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. You want to know where he tattoos now? Elm Street Tattoo with Oliver Peck.
It's pretty sweet.
Okay,
Shout
like
out
I'm
David.
just like he lives in Dallas now. He pursued his dream, and he is a sought after, appointments only tattoo artist.
Yeah.
But he gave me my first tattoo, and he was just starting to do it in like 2010, 2009.
Yeah.
Now he's who he is, and he chops down and rebuilds bikes and travels the country, and he's living his dream, and that's all I'm saying. Like, man, I lost my mom, and that's when I realized, and I hate even that terminology. Like, I lost her. She wasn't a possession. She was a sidekick. She was my partner. She wasn't a possession, but like once she was gone, yeah, man, no time to waste. I want to have kids. I want to get married. I want to have the life that makes me happy.
Yeah.
So anytime, just seriously, like right here, right now, as your friend, like don't ever, I get it. We got to provide whatever, but like, please, like don't ever sit next to me and let me not cheer you on for trying to do whatever makes you happy.
Yeah.
You know?
No, and and I think that that's something, whether it's, being 32 years old, just, in the last 5-6 years, starting to become somewhat of a responsible human being and just having kids. I mean, I'm married for the second time, and lack of life experience that I think doing stuff like this, it puts it into perspective for me for sure. But, I think that there's a certain part of my ego that still exists that just doesn't want to recognize mortality in any sense, and so I think that what can I walk away from today or tomorrow and do about it other than have conversations like this?
Yes.
I'm not quite sure.
Right.
But so what I'm kind of curious that I kind of would want to ask, what does, and as descriptive or non-descriptive as you want to be, but like, what does your job, like, what does that look like on an appointment basis or like a date? Like, I've got it, like, talk to us a little bit about what that looks like. I'm curious.
So, what I tell people is we're all unique individuals, and so our needs are all different, and where we're at that moment in terms of accepting our mortality or not accepting our mortality, or it's all different. So I have to meet people where they're at, right? And so sometimes I will be hired by someone who has just found out they have a terminal diagnosis, right? And they're doing that. Sometimes, and maybe their families are interested in talking to me, maybe not. Sometimes I'm hired by someone whose parent is dying, and maybe they're on their deathbed already, so I come into the picture at different times. It's hard. Sometimes people will call me in and I'm like, okay, there's 17 fires raging right now. Like, which one is most important? Because we're not going to get them all out, and what I do is I listen, right? And the first thing I ask people is what feels undone right now. And for some people that's, well, I don't have my advanced directives in order. And for some people it's, I haven't talked to my sister for 15 years, and the notion of dying with that still being out there. So it's like, okay, so we can, so I do, the main thing that I do is I listen, right? And I don't solve. I hold the space so you come up with your own solution. I can say, oh, you're interested in green burials? Like, sure, here's a great website, or, here's a great website to look at when you're doing your advanced directives. But I'm not like, you should do it this way, because how do I know what you want to do? And I remember in one of my first trainings, the woman said, it's not your business nor your right to tell people what the meaning of their life was. You know, it's just not. And maybe some people, you know, in Hollywood, like it shows us like you're diagnosed with a thing, and then it's like, and that's really every time Louie and I will be watching something on TV and someone's dying, I'm like, it doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way, you know? And so, you know, it's some people, you know, they're kind of like a mean son of a bitch when I first meet them, and they're a mean son of a bitch when they take their last breath. You know, like some people do change, you know, so I will do everything from help people with their advanced directives or go through. I have a checklist of like, okay, these are the things you need to get together in a file, both on your computer and hard copy. Because so take for instance your AT&T bill or your Cox bill or whatever. Are your name and your partner's name on them, or just one of the names?
Just one.
Got to get the other name on it, because if it's not, right, and that other person dies whose name is not on it, you are going to have to make sure that account doesn't have to be closed, but you're going to have to show a death, you know, a certificate and whatever.
Like turning in your plates at DMV.
Exactly. So it's just stuff like that. And it's a pain in the butt to do, but it's an even bigger pain in the butt when you've just lost someone and that poor person on the other end of the phone is like explaining to you and you let loose. Like
we sat
all
down
of
with
your,
my, you know, I remember we sat down at my house at the dinner table, and my dad was there, my sister was there, and Courtney was there because as my wife, I was like, well, or my fiance at the time, but I was like, you should be part of any of this decision making. And you know, my dad owns a small business, and it's like, well, you and your sister should get X amount of share. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, he has no clue. Mm-hmm. Like in my mind, that's what I was thinking. And I didn't want to disrespect my father, but I'm like, he has no clue that God bless my father, but at 78 years old, I'm going to have to march up to AT&T with him.
Right.
Because he's, you know, like, oh, I got too many PIN numbers. I don't want that goddamn PIN number, you know. But it's like, this is all the stuff we're going to have to do. Like my mom's, my grandfather's house in Winfield, Louisiana, like literally the land that time forgot. And it is a shanty. I mean, and it's, well, 50% now goes to you and your sister. And I'm like, all right, Summer, you got that. And it really was. It was handled poorly by my mom, I think, in a lot of ways, and my dad. Mm-hmm. But I think it was handled poorly by us because, again, mortality. Your parents are going to live forever. It just said, I don't know. It's like, and then when she died, that's when I was, and it's a weird conversation with your dad later. Yeah. Like you're at lunch and I'm like, well, Dad, have you ever because he's looking at me like, oh, so you're ready for me to die? I'm like, no. But dude, were you not present for all this? It's literally the scariest and weirdest. It's conversations you don't know how to navigate. Yeah.
But it truly is the biggest, if you can do all this prep work, you know, like now, it makes it so it's not left to your survivors to do this, and that you can all be present at the end instead of someone being like, I'd love to sit here and hear that story one more time about, you know, whatever, but I can't because I got to go to the bank and try and you know, get this account switched over or whatever. And you know, so it's a huge gift to do this. And they are hard conversations, but they really are necessary because what happens is if you wait too long, right, you end up making decisions because your back is against the wall. And it's not a decision you want, but you don't have an option. Yeah. And so that too. So I'm like, okay, to have the time to think about it, you can make intentional decisions that are in line with what you really want, you know, versus like, well, I had to, you know, I've seen situations where someone's dying and they figured, you know, I don't care what happens to my body after. I'm not going to be here. Do with me whatever you want. And then you have one kid who's like, Mom wanted to be buried. And the other was like, no, she wanted to be cremated. You don't get a do-over on that.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's like a lot. I've seen it too with, and this is something, you know, you should put in your advance directives. A man was dying and his 2 daughters were there, and the nurse said, "Do you want artificial hydration?" Well, artificial hydration is going to extend your life.
Life-saving
And
measures
and one daughter's like, "Yes," and the other one's like, "No." And it's like, you know, again, like that's to really, really be clear. Especially another thing, one of my trainings that I took was for dementia, which, you know, is a whole other thing because so not having this in writing before that it's hard because it's like that person can't make their own decisions and you can't make them for them, you know. So it's there's as uncomfortable as it is now, like it truly, the weight that is off your shoulders is so much. It's just it just allows you to be present, and it allows you, and then it allows the grieving process too to be not. I always tell people it's like when you haven't done all this work, someone dies and you're running around and you're doing all these things, and then you're kind of like Wile E. Coyote, where it's like you're going, and then you're at the edge of the cliff, and when it's all over, and then you crash, you know. And you know, I said to a woman, she's 50. Not married, no kids, and has a dog that's like her life. And I said, "What's going to happen to your dog when you die?" And she said, "Oh, my mom's going to take it." And I said, "How old's your mom?" And she said, 80. And I was like, "You might want to rethink that." She's like, "Oh my God, I have to think about that." And I'm like, yeah. You know, I say to people, who is your village? Like, who is your village that if, you know, the time comes when you're in the hospital or your partner's in the hospital, you know, who can you count on? Because people want to help. But what happens is people say, "Let me know if there's anything I can do." There's 9 million things you can do. And guess what? Like my head's about to explode and I don't have the time to make that decision for you. So coming up with, you know, who loves your dog? Like when my dad was in the hospital, my friend Sally loves my dogs. And she said, "I'm going to come over every day and walk your dogs for you while you're gone." Like it meant so much. My 3 best mom friends texted me. Our kids were in Montessori school together. And they said, "While you're gone, we're going to make the kids lunches every day." And so I didn't have to worry about it. Louis didn't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. It meant so much to me, you know? So it's like coming up with this plan just makes it, you know, you're just prepared. And so that you're prepared so that you can spend your time doing what's really important, whether it's, so going back to your original question, like, what do? I help people. I bring up these questions for them to think about, you know. Sometimes I just like, okay, because a lot of times what happens when families come together, it doesn't matter how old you are. Like, you might be 50 years old, you know, but you come back into this household and you're 15 years old again, you know, like, and all of those family dynamics get activated. And so,
boy, do they.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, okay, what can we do to get you to a place where you can walk into, you know, that household and be of ultimate service and not have this huge resentment against your sibling or whatever it is, mm-hmm. you know, so sort of holding space for that, coming up with legacy projects that you can, you know, do. I worked with this woman she was an amazing cook, and we took her recipes and I said, "Okay, what's the story behind these?" "Oh, this cake, my grandmother in Mississippi made this. This is like the birthday cake."
And we gotten with my mom and you, man.
And right, and that's it. And so we took all these stories and we put them with the recipes, and we put pictures. And so there's a book now that's going to live for generations. Yeah. So all these people who never were going to get to meet this woman are going to know her, you know? So yeah. I named my company You Were Here because it's this idea of like we all make a mark, right? Mm-hmm. And some of it's, you know, on the front page of the paper, good and bad, you know, and some of it's just like the maybe you're a gardener and like maybe you want to sort of plant a community garden, or maybe you want to start a scholarship and, you love dance like that, like all these ways we can do this. And I will hold space, there's all that grieving, that anticipatory grief that comes up. So really kind of making the time to do that and make the space. I worked with a family, they had a 16-month-old with leukemia.
Nope.
And, my worst fear. And I was at their house and I was saying, okay, because everyone, was saying like, what can we do to help? They had enough food for like 17 freezers, and the father said half jokingly, like, well, I have this fence that like was half built until, kind of the shit hit the fan and like we kept, and I said, and he was a pastor. And I said, okay, so you know what? I bet there's 10 guys at your church who would love to come build a house because you all love to fix things and build things. I know that from my husband's redoing my closet right now. Like, that's a lot safer than filming and talking.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And I was like, you know what? That's a great way for people to be able to help in a way that feels comfortable for them.
And still be somewhat detached.
Exactly. Do you know that fence got built like that? Like it's just, so it's getting, for me, because I'm not part of the family and because I'm, detached from all the craziness, like I can be that sort of clear, like, okay, what about this? Yeah. Have you ever thought of this? And which is really helpful because you have a lot of things get really heated and people, will just get so fixated on something. And so I do a lot of that. I will help people. I'll say to people, do you want a memorial service or do you want a last party? And it's really nice. Like some people are like, I want to have a party. I want to hear the nice things that people are going to say to me, And so planning that, I'll help people come up with a vigil plan, which is like at the very, very end when you're not communicating, when you've really drawn into yourself, like, what do you want surrounding you in those last days? What music do you want? What smells do you want? Is there a certain view from your house that you love? Like, I talked about this in my TED Talk. Like, I want there to be a basket and note cards, and I want everyone to, when they come to say goodbye, I want them to write down what they learned from the way that I live my life. And I want that given to my children. And, that's not something I would have come up with if I was afraid to think about death and afraid to accept that, so it's like being able to really orchestrate, like, the control freak in me is like, oh, let's, I want this and this and this. And, am I going to get all the things I want? Probably not, I mean, because I could also be hit by a bus tomorrow, which is why I've started doing these, I call them that if I'm hit by a bus notes, where I've started writing basically thank you letters to people in my life who, for whatever, like my college roommate, like I see her on social media and like we text every now and then, but like we're not as in touch as I wish we were. And I just sat down and I wrote her a letter and I was like, thank you so much for this. And I learned this from you and I'll never forget this. And like, I appreciate you so much. And I feel like, that's that thing, like that doesn't feel undone anymore. If something happens to me or her, like we're good. Yeah. And that's how I felt with my dad. Every time I got on the plane, we're good. We've said it all, and that's so huge because I've seen what it looks like when you're not good with someone. And I've seen the regret and the guilt. And
that's what I mean by like making sure like how short time becomes because like with my mom, I remember the one that you talk about like being transported back to like being, that was the only thing I really do remember is I when that was it, like I crawled in her lap and I just wailed because I was a 6-year-old little boy again.
Yeah.
You know, I was in her lap. She would, and I just, because I knew I would never have that again. And I let out a huge wail, and I was just, Mama, and I just, I missed her, whatever. But it was like just grief.
Yeah.
We were straight. Yeah. There was nothing left that had to be said. Yeah. It was some of the other stuff you're talking about that was just real hard. Like, I was the one who had to, like, when the doctor was like, she didn't want any life-saving measures. And I had another buddy whose mom, the universe, I had another buddy about 6 months later, his mom got sick and died. And about almost a year later, another buddy's mom got sick and died. But the second buddy, we were sitting there talking, Chance, and it's a feeling of like you're being complicit in their death. Mm-hmm. When you're like, there's no more that can be done, and you're having to. That's the stuff, like preparing all the things are good and I think necessary and I think important so that you are able to grieve. Right. But it's like, I mean, outside of like tragedy where like they're hit by a bus or somewhere, there's like, there is no, but when you're sitting there my mom went on Lundy Gras on Monday and Thursday, she, that 4 days, like the last 2 days were just, and you're sitting there and you're trying to like figure out who you are, what place you have in this family. Like all these things just come to you and like, what is life and what is time and all these things that you never, I don't contemplate that driving to the store. Yeah. And, it was so hard because I'm going like, I'm thinking all these things. And I just told a doctor, pump my mom full of morphine. And nobody sat down and talked to me about that, Yeah. But I will say, I feel like I was maybe prepared emotionally better than my dad or my sister because at 77 years old, my mom was like, I've got stage 4 ovarian cancer. And I'm like, that's it. Yeah. Like I knew it. And they were like, well, what's the treatment plan? And I'm going,
Well, and what I kind of, I don't know, my brain works in summaries and cliff notes and takeaways, and just listening to all of that, like, and thinking about what I shared about myself beforehand, like avoiding or skirting or ignoring that, what do they say, death and taxes, that absolute certainty of being on this planet is extremely unhealthy emotionally. It's an extreme burden on the people administratively. Like, and my sister-in-law, her and my wife, her and her sister talk back and forth and have over the last year or two just about my sister-in-law. Like, and she's only a couple years older than me, 34, I think. Sorry, Ashley, but I think she's 34. But her sorting out a lot of that stuff, like, hey, if this happens, this is going to go to Julia, my daughter. And if this happens, this bank account is in her name. And if this happens, the AT&T, like all this stuff. And I sit back and I listen to it and I go, man, that's really efficient and organized and cool. But her job is, I'm always driving. I'm always on the road. I'm going to Madisonville or I'm going to the other side of the river or whatever. And she's the same. She's driving all over the state for work. And so it's totally unreasonable to think there's no chance any form of quick instant tragedy can happen to me when statistically speaking my chances are pretty decent because I'm driving all over. But it makes me sit back and think, like, and the legacy stuff is cool, especially because we talked about that from the very beginning about legacy and what that means as a dad and leaving behind a legacy and that legacy being our kids, kind of just to summarize. But, I've taken a lot away from just the last few minutes of that. And I kind of want to bring up one more thing, I think, not to rush or anything like that, but to kind of bring it back to, or bring it to dads and men in general. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's probably just kind of like a general consensus as a society that as the man, as the dad, as the husband, you are supposed to be the strong one. You are supposed to hide it, don't show it, cry alone, or go build a fence. And you even made that point. And the detachment, we're better at fixing and building. Like, I don't know, but I think I would be much better at handling all of the administrative stuff when my mom or stepdad passes than I would actually sitting there and having to understand the loss of my parent, and just because whatever. But I think a lot of what we've talked about in these first few episodes and so far is pretty raw and honest and vulnerable. And I've certainly, Carl doesn't have many, but I've certainly admitted to a lot of my flaws and faults.
I don't have any.
But as somebody who does what you do and has the experience that you have, can you maybe talk a little bit about that side of things? Just for one, I mean, I guess in your experience watching men or husbands lose loved ones and not process it in a healthy, from a grief standpoint, in a healthy way, and what that seems to do to them, and just maybe kind of talk a little bit about that and your experience in dealing with men and dads and loss.
Yeah. So I think that, men, I was talking to this woman who said her father had been a doctor and he retired, and he was suddenly like just really angry and cranky and all that. And I said, right, because he's grieving. And she was like, what? And I said, he's grieving. That's what grieving looks like for a lot of men, right? Because it looks like that, whereas women, and I hate to justify because it isn't like, not to generalize, but it is like, we process our feelings by talking to other people, and it's that whole men are from Mars, women, Louis does not want to hear me process like from A to Z. Like, he's like, what do you need me to do? What do you need me to fix?
We like the headlines. Y'all like the details.
And sometimes, like, I'll talk to him and he's rushing to try and find a solution. I'm like, I don't want the solution. I just want you to listen, And so grieving, there is no solution, because your only real solution is that the person comes back, and they're not going to. So it really is
dealing with finality.
But it really is like, and also knowing with grief, this is where you are right this moment. And you're not always going to be there, and if you let yourself fall apart and you let yourself feel your feelings, it's not going to kill you. It's not going to be a tidal wave. Like, it's going to be cathartic, and a little bit of it will go. They always say, like, when am I going to, stop? When is this going to be over? When is this grief going to be over? And it's like, well, how long did you love the person? Because, it's never going to be over. It's going to change. And so I think what I've seen, and again, going back to, because I'm more of a impartial observer, sometimes it's actually what my experience has been. It's been a lot easier for men to talk to me because I'm not, they don't have to put on that game face in front of me, so they can kind of let their guard down a little bit more. And, I've seen men go into therapy, because of this, which is awesome. And, but, I think I try and be really creative because just sitting there, especially when someone's dying, like, and just sitting there and talking, a lot of times it feels a lot worse. So, whether I was thinking about that 16-month-old who died, had an older brother, and I think he was 9. And I went over to the house, and we made, those little, they look almost like popsicle sticks, but they've got little like divots in them so you can build something with it, right? So we took those sticks and we wrote on them a memory he had of his little brother, like the way that he always liked to, whatever it is. And then we built this house, and we called it the memory house, right? And so he kept it in his room. And every time he would write something down, I'm like, tell me about that day. And he was telling me about the day, and he was reliving how joyful it had been. And he knew by talking about it, like, these memories were not going to leave him. And he could always go to this house and like, look at them. And then we took these links, these paper links, and we wrote, like, you know, if I need to laugh, I can go to you know what I mean? And so we did this, it was called the support chain. And so if I need to cry, if I need a hug, if I need, you know, whatever, and and I'd say, what? Oh, so tell me, like, why? So Carl sounds like that. Tell me what's funny about Carl. Oh, you know, so he was sort of knowing that he was going to be supported through this, right? So it was a way of him being able to process his feelings, but knowing that there was hope, that he wasn't just going to be kind of left out there to twist in the wind once his brother was gone, you know? So whether it's, I'll sit down with people, especially with men, and go through like a photo album. Oh, who's this? Because I don't know. I'm not there, you know? So they get to tell me the stories, right? And sometimes they get really sad when they tell the stories. This was our wedding and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But it's okay, you know, and I sit there and I listen and, you know, just sort of hold that space for them. So it's, I think being able to kind of, what I try and do with people, it's, this is so sad that you're losing this person, but like, you're so sad because there was so much joy, and that joy will never be taken away from you. You know, it's always there. And I think because I was squared away with my dad, like, I miss my dad terribly, but I don't have that grief that comes from having regrets. You know, like my dad he loved basketball, and my son's a great basketball player. And like every basketball game, I'm like, oh God, I wish my dad could.
Yeah.
But it's like, but I also believe he is there, you know? So it's like, it's, and we talk about, and that's another thing too. And I will say this, you know, especially because you guys have small children. I read once, and I really like it. Like, when I talk about my dad with my kids, I never say my dad, I say your grandfather, because they're never going to get to know him like I did, but he still belongs to them. So if I keep saying my dad, my dad, my dad, because they have so few memories of him, but if I say your grandfather,
you get to have it.
Yeah. And they're connected. Cool. And so it's just, it's these little things that just kind of, I don't know, it changes it. And they get to say, I remember this one woman hired me, and she said, I had no idea what it was you did. Like, a lot of people are like, is this some woo-hooey thing, you know? And that's another thing, people, especially here in the South, when they hear what I do, they'll say, oh, we already have a pastor. And I'm like, first of all, I'm Jewish. And second of all, like, I'm not, if you want to talk about spiritual things, cool, but that's not what I'm there for. And I'm not there to take that person's place. Like, you know, I'm there to just hold space and support you as you walk through this. But, you know, it's, I don't know. It's really, so this woman said, I didn't know what it was that you did, but like, I can't imagine having gone through it without you, you know? And she had a really complicated relationship with her mom, and ended up like, really, there was so much healing, and she got into therapy, and like her life has really changed, you know? So it's, you know, again, it's the inevitable. When someone's going to die, like, they're going to die. And I do think that is, you know, especially for men, it's that, well, what other treatment can we do? Mm-hmm. And someone
back
to
us wanting to fix it and figure it out.
And that's why it also, there's some really great, you know, I'm thinking there's this thing called the Conversation Project that was started by Atul Gawande, who's an amazing physician who wrote a book called Being Mortal, he's a doctor, but his dad was diagnosed with cancer. So it was like he found himself on the other side of the desk, and he saw how poorly, like, we deal with this. And, you know, so he put together this thing called the Conversation Project, and they have these guides, like, for you to, like, kind of questions for you to think about. And so one of the questions is like, what constitutes a good day for you? Or like, what's really important that if you're unable to keep doing X, Y, and Z, like, do you know what I mean? Because for a lot of people, you know, and I believe with my dad, it was the chemo that got him. Do you know what I mean? Like the PET scan showed that he there was no more evidence of cancer, but like every chemo treatment, he just got weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, you know, but you know, you get to decide like how far you want to go. And I think it is so brave for someone to say, you know what? I'm done. I would rather have 3 months of feeling halfway decent, you know, and being able to be with my loved ones than continuing, you know. And I saw that like with my dad's oncologist, they put him on hospice finally. And they told me he probably has 72 hours. And I told the oncologist, and he said, but you're not giving him a chance to get better. I was like, he's done. It's his failure to thrive on his chart. Like he's been put on hospice. Like it made me so mad. And he did. He died 72 hours later, you know? And so I think that, you know, again, like being able to have these conversations before you're even sick, to say like, you know what? If the time comes where, you know, I have a life, you know, like I'm going to die and treatment isn't helping me, I want to stop after a while. Like I want you to know that I want to stop, and you can write that down, you know, and it's stuff. But having that conversation now, it's not charged, right? Because you're not dying right now. I mean, we all are, but you know what I mean? It's so it becomes a lot easier to start wrapping your head around. So when the time does come, it's like, you know what that person wished for, and you support that.
You are a goddamn treasure. I'm just seriously, Louis, screw this up. I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Like seriously. Doodads podcast. Subscribe. Go to YouTube. Official Doodads podcast. Subscribe, like, hit the link, hit the ding, hit the bell. TikTok, Official Doodads podcast. See our reels, like them, share them. Go to Facebook, Instagram. Find us everywhere. Spotify. Again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the, you know, I just, I don't know. I could talk about this for hours.
I know. I feel like we could sit here for all night.
And I say in closing, it is because you have made me, having already experienced this though, even more comfortable, you know. And I think that's the thing that we're talking about, is like, how do dads feel comfortable about stuff like, or guys, you know?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah.
I love you.
Tremendously.
Seriously.
So good to
Thank
see you.
I think we have to ask her the most important question before we leave, right? So some nice little corny thing that we came up with after the name of the podcast. If there was something, whether it be after they hear this the next morning or for the next 6 months or for the rest of their life, which I think is awesome to get a woman and a mother and a wife's perspective on this question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What would you suggest dads do? Whether it's in relation to everything we talked about tonight or just something that you feel like we could do better at.
If you were looking at your son and you're thinking about him 20 years from now,
Right.
what would you hope he does?
I would hope that he would feel he would be okay with the fact that it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be okay, you know? And you know, I said this to my kids. I was dropping off at school the other day, and I said, you know, you want to surround yourself with people that when you walk away, you feel like you stand a little taller and you feel more energized. Like those are your people. You want to be with people who get you and who are your fans. And I feel the same, like kind of going back to, the career thing. And there's certainly that, like, I'm doing this because I got to pay the bills, but I really want to do this. And you can, just like preparing for death, you can take little steps to start doing that. So, like, when I was at that job that I didn't want to be at anymore, on weekends, I started writing a script. And even if nothing ever happened, like, it was bringing me joy because I was doing something that I loved. So whether it's like, even I tell people, you don't have to go sign up. It's the same with writing. Like, you don't have to sit down and write. Go Google, like, an article about inspiration about writing, or a class about writing, or whatever. Like, just take a little bit of action to go towards the things that bring you joy. Because I do think what I've seen, a lot of men sacrifice joy because they feel this uber responsibility.
It's my dad.
Take care. Yeah.
That's
And
good.
then, you know what? Because I'll tell you this. No one on their deathbed has said, I should have worked harder. In fact, it's usually the opposite. So think about that. Think about when you're on your deathbed.
Oh,
like,
I'd be
what are
thinking about it a
you?
lot.
Yeah, I'm
you
probably
know?
not going to sleep tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doodads,
you.
check us out. Love you, brother.
Love you too.